Number 10. Benshihu Colliery, China, April 26, 1942. On April 26, 1942, a gas and coal dust explosion occurred at the Benshiu Colliery, a coal mine located in Benshiu, Liaoning Province, China, sending flames bursting out of the mine shaft entrance. The mine was under Japanese control during World War II, operating as part of the puppet state of Manchukuo, and used forced Chinese laborers who worked under harsh conditions. The explosion was triggered by a methane and coal dust ignition underground, with accounts indicating the ventilation system had failed due to a loss of electrical power earlier that day. In the immediate aftermath, Japanese guards were stationed at the shaft opening to cordon off the site, and an electric fence was later erected to keep miners' relatives and unauthorized personnel away. Mine managers sealed sections of the mine and shut down ventilation systems in an attempt to cut off oxygen to the fire and contain the blaze. This response trapped thousands of miners underground, and subsequent investigations concluded that the majority of deaths resulted from carbon monoxide poisoning rather than the explosion itself. It took 10 days for workers to remove all the corpses and rubble from the shaft, with victims carried out in carts to a mass grave, and many bodies were burned beyond recognition. The official death toll was 1,549 miners, comprising 1,518 Chinese laborers and 31 Japanese personnel, representing approximately 34% of the roughly 4,500 workers on shift that day. The disaster remains the deadliest mining accident ever recorded, and subsequent investigations highlighted severe working conditions, poor safety standards, and inadequate emergency procedures at the mine. Number 9. Courrières mine disaster, France, March 10, 1906. The Courrières mine disaster occurred on March 10, 1906, in northern France, killing 1,099 miners in what became Europe's worst mining accident. A coal dust explosion devastated the coal mine operated by the Compagnie des Mines de Huy de Courrières, located 2 kilometers east of Lens in the Pas-de-Calais region. The large explosion was heard shortly after 6:30 on the morning of Saturday, March 10, 1906, throwing an elevator cage at Shaft 3 to the surface and blowing out windows and roofs at Shaft 4. A fire had been reported deep in the mine the day before the explosion, and workers had attempted to seal off the area to contain the flames, but flammable gas leaked from the walls and ignited. At the time of the explosion, 1,795 workers were inside the mine's deep tunnels, with approximately 591 escaping immediately, while some 2/3 of the miners perished. Rescue attempts began quickly on the morning of the disaster, but were hampered by the lack of trained mine rescuers in France at that time, the scale of the disaster, and the effects of toxic gas and fire. Expert rescue teams from Paris and from Germany arrived at the scene on March 12, 1906, with 25 fully equipped German miners from Westphalia joining the effort. The primary cause of the catastrophe could not be determined with absolute certainty, as all witnesses to the initial accident were gone. The disaster triggered the largest strike wave in France's history up to that point, with over 40,000 miners striking by late March 1906 to demand better safety standards and working conditions. Number 8. Sangenid Colliery explosion. Wales, October 14, 1913. The Sangenid Colliery disaster occurred at the Universal Colliery in Sangenid near Caerphilly, Glamorgan, Wales, on 14 October 1913, when a massive explosion ripped through the deep pit at 8:10 a.m. The explosion killed 439 coal miners, and one rescuer died the following day from a fall of stone while fighting a fire, making it the worst mining accident in the United Kingdom. Nearly 950 men had been working below ground that morning, with the explosion and subsequent release of poisonous gas killing many before they even knew what was happening. The cause of the explosion was believed to be a spark from underground electrical signaling equipment that ignited methane and hydrogen gas known as fire damp, which then caused coal dust on the mine floor to rise and explode in a series of self-fueling explosions. The coal seams at Universal Colliery contained high quantities of fire damp, and the colliery had high levels of airborne coal dust, which exacerbated the explosion and carried it further into the mine workings. Rescue teams from Sangenid were joined by colleagues from other South Wales collieries, but their efforts were hindered by wreckage and fire, with rescue operations continuing for 3 weeks. An inquest held in January 1914 brought in a verdict of accidental death, while an inquiry conducted by Chief Inspector of Mines RAS, Redmayne lasted almost a month and found numerous faults with the colliery's owners and management. The inquiry discovered that the mine had inadequate ventilation and poor safety practices, and that required improvements to ventilation fans mandated by the Coal Mines Act 1911 had not been completed despite extended deadlines. The Universal Colliery was back in operation by the end of November 1913, eventually closing in 1928, while a Welsh national memorial to all mining disasters was unveiled at the former pithead on the centenary in 2013. Number 7. Monongah Mining Disaster, West Virginia, December 6, 1907. On December 6, 1907, at 10:28 in the morning, a coal mine explosion occurred at the Fairmont Coal Company's mines number 6 and 8 in Monongah, West Virginia. The blast began with an explosion in one section of the mine, followed by a larger explosion in another area, instantly killing most of those inside. The explosion destroyed ventilation systems necessary to supply fresh air to the mine, along with rail cars and other equipment, and caused considerable damage to the surface. Officially, 420 men were registered in the two mines that day, though the actual number was higher, as workers often took their children and other relatives into the mine to help. The two mines were connected by a shaft to allow both to be ventilated from one entrance, placing workers in both mines at risk when the explosion occurred. Rescuers were eventually able to reconnect the number 6 fan, but the inability to clear toxic gases from the mines delayed and complicated rescue and recovery efforts. One Polish miner was rescued, and 4 Italian miners escaped, but the official death toll stood at 362, making it the worst mining disaster in American history. Investigators concluded that an underground train wreck, a blasting operation gone awry, or an open flame lamp likely created an ignition that stirred accumulations of dust and gas, triggering the massive explosion. The disaster contributed to the creation of the United States Bureau of Mines in 1910, an agency responsible for reducing mining accidents, though strict safety standards were not enforced until the mid-20th century. Number 6. Mitsubishi Hojo Coal Mine, Japan, December 15, 1914. The Mitsubishi Hojo mine disaster occurred December 15, 1914, in Kyushu, Japan. A gas explosion at the Hojo coal mine killed 687 workers. The blast was caused by methane and coal dust ignition, when some sort of spark set off the explosion underground. The mine was a shaft mine that pioneered deep shaft mining in Japan and was one of the deeper mines of its day, at parts reaching 295 feet deep. The explosion blew the elevator cage approximately 15 meters into the air and affected people within a 200-meter radius of the mine entrance. Contemporary reports describe the force of the explosion lifting the mine shaft cage high into the air, while dense smoke and toxic gases spread rapidly through the workings. After the explosion, the mine owners cut up hundreds of oranges and tossed them down the shaft, thinking that the citrus would negate the poison gas fumes, and rescuers held summer oranges in their mouths and breathed only through their noses under the same belief. It is the worst mining accident in Japanese history. Different sources give different death tolls of 680 or 686, and some reports suggest Mitsubishi may have tried to cover up the actual death toll, which could have been as high as 1,000 miners killed. Number 5. Laobaidong Coal Mine, Shaanxi, China, May 9, 1960. The Laobaidong coal mine disaster occurred on May 9, 1960, near Datong in Shaanxi Province, China, and killed 684 miners in a methane explosion underground. The mine had increased its production by 50% above its recommended safety capacity during China's Great Leap Forward industrialization campaign. The explosion occurred during a shift change when overcrowding in the shaft created conditions where a spark ignited methane that had accumulated in the tunnels. The ventilation system was either inadequate to remove the gas buildup or unable to cope with the production overload at the time of the incident. The disaster was classified as a state secret by Chinese authorities and remained largely suppressed for decades after it occurred. Information about the incident was not disclosed by Chinese media at the time, with the government withholding details until the early 1990s. The disaster was eventually revealed to the public when China Coal Post reported on it in 1998, more than 3 decades after the tragedy. The incident reflected broader safety challenges within China's rapidly expanding coal sector during the early decades of the People's Republic. The Lao Beidong disaster remains one of the deadliest mining accidents in post-1949 China, and among the worst coal mining disasters ever recorded worldwide. Number 4. Colebrook North Colliery, South Africa, January 21st, 1960. On January 21st, 1960, at the Colebrook North Colliery near Sasolburg in South Africa's Northern Free State, approximately 900 coal pillars collapsed around 7:00 p.m., trapping miners 180 meters underground in what became the worst mining disaster in South African history. The collapse occurred when the supporting pillars failed catastrophically across an area covering roughly 324 hectares. Following warning signs earlier that afternoon when miners heard loud cracking noises and felt strong blast winds around 4:00 p.m. About 1,000 miners were working in the mine at the time of the disaster, and while many escaped through an incline shaft, 435 to 437 miners died after being trapped underground. The trapped miners were killed by a combination of methane gas suffocation, crushing rockfall, and deprivation during prolonged entrapment, with the majority being migrant workers from Lesotho and Mozambique. Rescue teams from surrounding collieries arrived immediately and attempted to reach the trapped miners, but their efforts were severely hampered by high concentrations of methane gas that had built up in the mine. A massive rescue drill was imported from Texas to drill through the rock layers, but it could not penetrate the hard dolerite layer above the mining area to reach the trapped workers. Boreholes that did reach the affected area indicated a major collapse of the mine workings, flooding, and dangerously high methane levels, and when a microphone was lowered into one borehole, it detected only the sound of water. An official investigation determined that the structural integrity of the supporting pillars had been compromised by aggressive extraction practices that reduced pillar sizes to meet increased production demands for the Taibos power station. Following the disaster, the Chamber of Mines established the Chamber of Mines Research Organization and the Coal Mines Research Controlling Council in 1963, leading to pioneering research including the development of the Salomon-Munro pillar strength formula that remains in use today. Number 3. Mitsui Mi-Kei Coal Mine, Japan, November 9, 1963. On November 9, 1963, at 3:12 p.m., a thunderous explosion occurred at the Mitsui Mi-Kei coal mine in Omuta, Japan. The disaster began when one of 10 coal-filled carts being hauled to the surface derailed at the bottom of the first mining level, causing 8 carts to break free and run downward for about 360 meters at increasing speed, before derailing and turning over, triggering the explosion. The rapid air displacement from the high-speed carts created air currents that mixed settled coal dust with the surrounding air, and friction from the overturning carts likely produced the spark that ignited the dust. The blast occurred approximately 500 meters below ground and triggered extensive carbon monoxide contamination throughout the mine. At the time of the explosion, 1403 miners were working in the mine. After the explosion, rescue efforts took place immediately. The disaster resulted in 458 deaths and 839 people suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning. Safety personnel at the mine had been greatly reduced to place more workers on production lines, and the mine was being operated with almost no attention to safety and explosion prevention, leading investigators to conclude the tragedy occurred as a result of the neglect of mining safety. The disaster prompted major scrutiny of Japanese mine safety procedures and emergency response systems. Number 2. Wangi Colliery Disaster, Zimbabwe, June 6, 1972. On June 6, 1972, at approximately 10:27 in the morning, a series of underground explosions occurred at the Wangi No. 2 Colliery in Rhodesia, now known as Zimbabwe. The initial explosion was caused by a methane gas ignition that was followed by a coal dust explosion, devastating the major shaft of the mine. A cable car was hurled from the No. 2 mine shaft, burning a row of papaya trees before coming to rest, 50 yards away, which was the first sign of the disaster. On or near the surface, 4 men were killed instantly, while hundreds of meters below ground, 426 miners, 390 of them black and 36 white, were trapped amid rock and deadly methane and carbon monoxide fumes. For 15 hours, rescue operations were hampered by gases seeping from the minehead, until colliery officers decided to clear the shaft by pumping air in to push the fumes deeper into the mine. A decision that permitted rescue efforts to begin but inevitably reduced the chance of finding anyone alive. Rescue teams listened in vain for pipe talk, the tapping of men who might have found sanctuary in pockets of fresh air, but there was never any sign of life in the 3-mile tunnel. On June 9th, the general manager of the Wankie Colliery, Gordon Livingston Blevins, decided to leave the 424 bodies where they were, as only 3 bodies had been recovered after the initial explosions. Mine rescue operations were born out of the 1972 disaster, as at the time there were no rescue teams in the country, and rescue teams responded from Zambia, South Africa, and Botswana. With 427 fatalities, the disaster remains the deadliest mine accident to date in the country's history, and the statutory regulation for coal mines and fiery mines was drastically changed and adopted afterwards as more mines were declared fiery. Number 1. Chasnala Mining Disaster, India, December 27, 1975. The Chasnala mining disaster occurred on December 27, 1975, in a coal mine near Dhanbad in the Indian state of Bihar, now Jharkhand, killing 372 to 375 miners, according to official government records. An explosion at 1:35 p.m., most likely caused by sparks from equipment igniting flammable methane gas, weakened the barrier between the active mine pit and an abandoned waterlogged mine above it. The blast destabilized an approximately 80-foot-thick roof of coal separating the 2 mines, causing it to collapse and release millions of gallons of water into the active workings. Water flooded into the mine at an estimated rate of 7 million gallons per minute, with total estimates ranging from 30 to 50 million gallons, or about 135,000 cubic meters. The mine had no high-pressure pump on site, so pumps had to be brought in from the Soviet Union, Poland, and the United States to attempt dewatering the flooded shafts. The first rescue team was sent down through pit number 2 on January 19, 1976, 23 days after the accident, but no one inside the mine at the time of flooding had any chance of survival. Former Chief Justice of the Patna High Court, Ujjal Narayan Sinha, was appointed to investigate the disaster and submitted his report on March 24, 1977. 4 officials from the Indian Iron and Steel Company, which owned the mine, were prosecuted for negligence, with concerns raised about inadequate safety equipment and an unsafely thin barrier between the mines. In 2012, 37 years after the disaster, 2 surviving officials, manager Ramanuj Bhattacharya and planning officer Deepak Sarkar, were each sentenced to 1 year imprisonment, while the other 2 accused had died,